Hello, everybody. So today I wanted to talk about Princess Diana, the late Princess Diana, who died in a car accident in I think it was the London to Paris tunnel. Don't even know what year it was. It was like 1994, something like that. It was a long time ago. It was, almost 30 years ago. And so the question I wanted to ask was she assassinated? Now, the first thing to note is that certainly at the time, we were told that she died as a result of the car she was in being chased by paparazzi, her driver going faster and faster and faster until she accidentally crashed. That's what we were told, right? That's what people were told was the fact. Then there was a trial, an investigation, all that, and it proved that no, actually the paparazzi weren't chasing her very fast. They loved her. They didn't want her to die. They weren't hounding her. So it was nothing to do with that. Then they had a second investigation about the driver, and it proved that he was drunk. That he had high levels of alcohol in his system and some drugs. And then it came to the question that was, well, he didn't drink. And he certainly wouldn't be drunk driving Princess Diana or Lady Diana or just Diana, as I suppose she was by then, because she divorced Prince Charles. He wouldn't be at that point. And then there was suspicion that he was drugged or in some way and poisoned or whatever you might want to call it. And then there was the question, and this has been raised a number of times, that this was on orders of Queen Elizabeth II. Now, the motivation's certainly there. If you look at what happened with Princess Diana, she was married to Prince Charles. Now, she was of noble birth, so she was a lady, if you like. She wasn't a commoner. She's not Meghan Markle. Meghan Markle was a commoner, very different. So Princess Diana was not a commoner. She was from the Spencer family. She's basically a lady, lord, lady, nobility. So she was allowed to marry the prince, right? So she was high enough. She was upper class. She was allowed to marry him, and he was allowed to marry her. Because if you know the historical thing, if you're a prince, you're only allowed to marry either a princess or a lord or a lady in your region. So she was a lady in the region, allowed to be married to. Commoners, well, a crown prince can't marry a commoner. Lesser princes can. So, for example, Prince Harry is allowed to marry Meghan Markle. Meghan Markle is most definitely a commoner. Nothing to do with race. It's to do with your family. So if you were the King of Egypt, you'd be allowed to marry him, but not just a commoner. But anyway, so Princess Diana was certainly nobility. Spencer family, been nobility for centuries. So when she married Prince Charles, obviously they had the two kids, and then she had an affair. In fact, she had at least 3 affairs. But she, of course, claimed that she was doing that because Prince Charles was having an affair with Camilla Parker Bowles, who he ended up marrying. Suspects that he probably was having an affair with her. Camilla Parker Bowles was also nobility. So essentially, Prince Charles was having 2 different people. And if you look at how royals work, he's probably allowed to do that. But she wasn't supposed to really expose that, and she wasn't allowed to as the lesser one. Because she was only a lady, she wasn't a princess. Certainly wasn't a crown princess. Even if she had been a princess, there's low princesses and high princesses, and there's a whole different, hierarchy that's quite complicated. So she was a long way below him. So he was allowed to have an affair. She wasn't, and yet she did have an affair. She had at least, I think 3. I think that's the number, but who knows? So, and she was on TV exposing these affairs. So it's one thing for her to have the affairs and a couple of people know, but it's another thing she was on camera, not just accusing Charles of it. Accuse Charles of it, who cares? People in the general public don't really care about that. But she was talking about her own affairs and then saying it was justified because of how upset she was. So there were all these big interviews, and people were really upset with the royal family over that, and they were taking her side. They were taking Diana's side. She was loved. She was a wonderful person. She was one of the first people to go to AIDS patients and touch them, because everybody was sure that you caught AIDS from touching them, whereas we know that you can only catch AIDS from either sex or drug use or needles or blood transfusions and things like that. So just touching them is perfectly fine. So, yeah, so she was considered very brave to do that. She was potentially risking catching AIDS and dying. So she did that. And there was other things that she did, and, she was just loved. And so then, of course, she died, and everybody got really upset. Elton John wrote a song about it, or changed the name of a song that was originally written for Marilyn Monroe, and he changed it to be about Princess Diana, My English Rose. And I don't know what it was originally, but it was originally about Marilyn Monroe. So it had the Marilyn Monroe version, and you had the Princess Diana version. And so, yeah, it was a pretty big deal. But so let's look at the possibility that Queen Elizabeth II had her assassinated. And the first thing to note is she allowed to? Well, yes. Perfectly legal. Had that happened, that's perfectly legal. The Queen and all kings, every country, all monarchs have always been allowed to, at least if you're the number one monarch. If you're just the prince, you might not be allowed to. Prince Charles probably doesn't have the authority. He might, but only really with permission of his mother. So Queen Elizabeth II, as the leading monarch, has the authority. And they always have had. And that's part of being a monarch. You're allowed to have people assassinated. In fact, you could have everybody below you killed if you wanted. Of course, they might then have an uprising and kill you. I mean, that's the part of the monarchy that kept them in check, if you like, that was that if they did the wrong thing too much, they could always be killed by the other lords, so who would bind together and make a new king. And that sort of thing happened every so often. In fact, if you look at a democracy is in a lot of ways an extension of a monarchy. And essentially, it just doesn't have that in-between stuff where there's a bit of corruption for a while and then somebody's killed or taken out of power. Because essentially a monarchy is a democracy in a sense, in a long-term sense. Because if you're not popular as a monarch, you get killed, and then there's a new monarch, and that's what happens. So with the democracy, it replaces that by having raw voting straight away. And I mean, essentially, you had voting in a monarchy, sort of. I mean, if you didn't have the support of the lords, you would be killed. And even if you did, but they were all fighting each other, then some rival people would come in and so forth. So, there is that. And, of course, they have assassination orders in other countries, and I can talk about that in a separate video. But, look, she had the power. There's no doubt that Queen Elizabeth II has the power to do that. She had the motivation to do it. Because, Princess Diana kept going and going and going. She wasn't going to stop. And, of course, we saw after Princess Diana died, the way people view the monarchy improved dramatically. So we can certainly say that if that was what happened and that was why, then it worked. It worked. It was a good idea. Not a good idea if you're Princess Diana, but if you're the Queen, from her perspective, good idea. Did she do it though? Or was this just an accident? Or was somebody doing it loyal to the Queen, but the Queen personally didn't have any idea? And I guess this is the thing, is that, like, I'm not high enough up to know if somebody would do that without their permission and just do it to be loyal to them and blah, 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 blah. They probably did. They probably did have people that would just do it without being explicitly ordered. I'm not saying the Queen got some people together and say, "Hello, you killed this person. I don't like them anymore." It seems like in today's day and age, it would make her look very unpopular if she did that. And assassinations nowadays have to be a bit more undercover than they used to be. Not like the days where the king would just say, "Off with their heads." Well, actually, was that a queen? I think it was a queen that did that. So they're not doing that sort of thing now. I think they do it a bit more secretly. Was Princess Diana killed? Probably. I think. Well, she did die, but was she killed as an assassination? I think probably she probably was. Anyway, that's all I want to say about that one. Okay, goodbye.